All right, in this part of the tutorial, we're going to make it so that when we pick up our pickups, we get a score and we can see it, as well as hopefully a wins text message when we've collected them all. So to do that, we're going to have to add a new interface element to the hierarchy. So I'm going to add an entity called a user interface 2D screen. And to the 2D screen, we're going to also add a couple of user interface items called text elements. One is going to be the count text, and the other one, I'm going to add it to the 2D screen again, is going to be called the, here we go, the win text. Now, the count text and the win text, for them to work, they need to have a font. And you would think that PlayCanvas would just provide you with a font, like a default font, but they do not. So I have a font file that I borrowed that I'm going to add to my project. It's called Indie Flower TTF, which I'm just going to drag over and put right here. And I'm going to include that in the notes for the video as well. And this is the file that we're going to actually use for the fonts. So I'm going to organize my project like I always say I should. In the root of my project, I'm going to make a folder called fonts. And then the fonts that I just pulled up, I think I put in the scripts folder. So these two files, I'm going to move into the fonts folder. So that's where they belong. So if I go back to count text, you'll notice here that in the font area it's empty. So if I click on the pencil, I can click this file and apply the font to it. And then for the win text, I have to do the same thing. Okay. And so that I can tell them apart, I'm going to call the win text in the text area, and count text. All right, so to see if this actually shows up, I'm going to run it. And you can see that they're on top of each other. So that's not ideal. I want the count text to be in the upper left-hand corner. So what I can do is I can change the anchoring. So right now it's anchored for the count text in the center. And I would rather have that in the top left. So I'm going to run it again and see if that looks better. Yeah, it's a little bit too far off the top. So let me go back again. I can't remember if changing it to top left anchor and pivot is better. Let's see. Yes, that looks a lot better. Okay, so what we want to do now is we're going to have to do some scripting. And there's a couple things we're going to have to do in the scripts. One is we need to detect if we've had a collision and then communicate that information from one of the rotators that's been collided with back to the player. So if I go to the rotator script, what I want to do is I want to say essentially when this code happens down here where there's been a collision, I want to notify the player that this has happened. So to do that, there's a feature in PlayCanvas, which I'll use this.app.fire. And this will allow you to send a message that can be received somewhere else in another script. And so I'm going to type in here rotator point. And this is just to tell that the rotator, a rotating object from the rotator class has issued a point, I don't know, message saying this, a point has been earned. Now, to receive this, we're going to have to go to the player controller script, which is attached to the player, and then set up some code to detect that we received that message. So that's going to happen in initialize. What we're going to do in here is this.app.on, and we're going to do on that specific message. You have to spell it exactly how we did it in the rotator.js file. So if we get the rotator point message, we have to direct it to a function. So we're going to call that on point, which I'll write in just a minute. And the context or the scope that that's going to be within is this one. So let me go ahead and add this on point function down here that we're saying is going to be called. So it's going to look like player controller dot prototype dot on point, and it's going to be just a new function. And when this function is called, we'll have to increase a score and then display our results. Now, before we can do that, we're going to have to set up some attributes for the class. So we have a speed, but we're also going to need, and I'm just going to copy and paste this a couple of times, we're going to need an attribute to keep track of not just the speed, but also the count. And that's once again going to be a number. And we'll say the default for that one is 0. We also need to have a reference to the text object called countText. We won't say it as a default, but it is going to be an entity because we need to be able to change its text. We also need an attribute that hooks up to the WhenText area. Now, in the initialize, what we can also do then is we could say that our count text, we can set its elements text to be, well, at the beginning of the game, it should say the count is 0. And likewise, for the WhenText, its elements text should be set to the empty string, because we don't have any data at the beginning. The other thing we have to do then is in the on point function is every time we get a point, we need to increase our count. So this dot count should go up by 1. And then we need to set our reference to the count text, its text, to be the current count, the count colon plus this dot count. So that's concatenating the string count with how many we've actually collected. I think that's the same format. Yeah, it is. And then one other thing we can add in here is because there's 8 power-ups, if this dot count gets to 8, and we'll say 8 or more just in case something strange happens, we could set the WhenText to appear. If I can spell element. And you can say something like, you win. Now, one more thing I'm going to add here in the code, which will seem a little weird, but essentially, in case we ever have the game restart, we want to deregister ourselves for any events. So instead of having just the on, we're also going to have an off command as well. So this says, like, if the game ever restarted, stop listening for any old rotator point commands that have been set up and start listening for new ones now. Okay, so the script is ready. If I go back to the interface, what I'm going to have to do is click on the player, look at its script, and I'm going to have to parse it again to show the new elements. And I'm going to have to hook up the count text and the WhenText. And we're going to give this a go. This might be it. All right, so our count is currently 0, and oh no, nothing happened. Every time I'm running into them, my count's not going up. So that means there is a bug. The most likely cause, my guess is that I spelled rotator point differently. Let's see. Rotator point. Let's see. Just check all of these. And this says it's going to call on point. On point. spelled that right. Well, that's disconcerting because it looks like I set it up right. Let me try that again. Run. Oh, this is so disappointing. What could be wrong? This is the fun part where you get to wonder with me, what could I have done wrong? So there's two possibilities that I'm trying to think about. So let's actually see if this function's being called. So I want to see if the onPoint function is being called. So I'm going to run this. And then I'm going to go to the developer tools to see in the console if it's printing out hi a bunch. And it is not. Well, let's see. Let me go run into one of these. Yeah, it is not. Okay. So at least I know. So why is onPoint not being called? This dot onPoint. It says spelled that all right. This dot app dot fire. This dot app dot fire. Oh, well, no. Oh, I wonder if I never save rotator.js. Oh, I hope that's not it. Oh, that was it. Yeesh. So everything was working. I just did not save the rotator.js file. Wow, that was silly. All right, so I'm through 7 of them. Let's see when I hit the 8th one. Yay, it says you win. All right, and that's a pretty functional game. Lots of room for adding cool extras to it, too.